All right, let's see if this works. All right. How's that? Okay, hopefully Crowdcast people can see me. And yeah, I can't tell if Facebook people can see me, but I think I am streaming to the right place. Oh, you can see me on Facebook now. Okay, great. Yay. All right. Okay, I can't believe that actually worked. All right, hi everyone. Welcome back. Sorry for the technical snafu. Let me go back and do a really quick run through of everything I just said. Welcome. Thank you for joining me in this session. Honored to be with you here in this time of sensitivity and uncertainty, as always. And I look forward to sharing time with you in our shared sacred space together today. Today we'll set sacred space. Our overall topic for this week will be the importance of following your delight. We may have one, perhaps two exercises. Actually, if you're counting, perhaps three exercises, two of which will be more slightly a bit of embodiment and meditation. And then we'll close sacred space. So assuming everything's still working, let's start sacred space. Sorry, we're having trouble playing this video. Okay, well, they've got the link. Crowdcast, the Facebookers will have the link if they need to come in. So let's set sacred space. So what we would like to do when we set sacred space is we would like to create a space here now together, which is devoid of fear, threat, and control, in order for us to open to higher guidance from within our own inner selves. However we define that. It could be from our intuition, it could be from divine flashes of insight, random intellectual flashes of brilliance, however we think about it. But in order to do that, we want to have and create a safe, mutually safe sanctuary space for all of us to come together in order to relax and surrender with no sort of feeling of any danger or threat to our being and to our participation here. And I'll explain how we do that in a second. But we want to do this so that we can partake of the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment that comes from being in sacred space together as a group. And in opening sacred space here together today, I will propose that we all follow the 4 principles of Presidian sacred space. And they are, in order, number 1, confidentiality. Standard Vegas rules: what happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. Now that is the rule when we are in person. And now, of course, we're online, the stream is public, the replay will be public. So the way we handle confidentiality here is via anonymization. So the way you would make yourself anonymous on the stream, only if you want, you don't have to be anonymous, but if you would like to be anonymous, you can come into the Crowdcast stream, and then it'll ask you for your email or whatever. You register for free, and then you come in, and then you go to the edit profile feature. And under edit profile, you change your username to Mickey Mouse, Harry Potter, what have you. And then you can continue chatting, asking questions, et cetera, anonymously. And you don't have to sort of chat or ask questions. But if you would like to, and you would like to do so anonymously, you can. So that's number 1. Number 2 is the principle of no threat, no controlling, and also even no fixing or tough love, right? No interventions, no trying to cure each other, even if it's well-intentioned, no trying to sort of do that for each other. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, right? If I recommend a book to you, or I say, oh, my sister-in-law did this and you should try this because it's really good. Even things like that is this feeling of threat, well-intentioned threat, but still threat, which is if you're in some difficulty and I give you this recommendation, if you don't do it, there is this, intrinsic threat of like, well, if I don't do what Artie said, then maybe, I'll be a dunderhead and I won't, get the healing relief that I'm looking for. And while there's nothing wrong with that, because that involves the sort of mechanisms and physics of threat, even well-intentioned threat, that belongs in the realm of the profane, which is the realm of fear, threat, and control, right? And the whole point of us coming together here, whatever we do, meditation, talks, just sitting around looking at each other, right? The whole point is to be in sacred space, because there are certain things that you can only do and certain kinds of nourishment you can only get when you are in sacred space together as a group. So that's what we're here to do. So here, no threat, no controlling, no fixing, no tough love. We're holding space for each other to be afraid, to be anxious, to be happy and relaxed. And however you are, you will feel something about that. You may feel okay with however you are. You may feel guilty and even more anxious about how you are. So you may be anxious and then you feel anxious about the fact that you're anxious. So however you are, right, we leave you as you are. We hold space for you to be as you are, because in sacred space, there is no fear, threat, or control. So all of us, when we do that together, will tend to create this shared space for all of us to be able to do that, myself included, right? Which is why I love coming to sacred space with all of you here every Sunday. The third principle is the principle of no commerce, right? As a corollary, nothing may be sold in sacred space. I can't sell you anything. Gowrie can't sell you anything. My editor in Bangalore, who will be joining us on screen in a moment. Please don't sell anything to each other in the chat, right? But not just selling, but also recommending or suggesting things. So if you're like, oh, I'm in deep trouble and I recommend a book, even that we try to refrain from in this venue. Because as I said before in the example, if I recommend something, there is a veiled threat there that you may internalize, that if I don't read this book, I may still be in trouble. And so there's nothing wrong with that. It's well-intentioned, but we do that outside in profane space. We do that later. Here in sacred space, we are here for your energy, not for the things you bring. We are here for you. We are here for what you are, not for what you do or provide. The essence of you, not for your value add. The value add can wait till later, or not at all. Okay, so no commerce, no recommendations. That's number 3. And finally, number 4, another corollary, there's no expectation of participation. So there's no pressure to do anything. You can chat, not chat, ask questions, not ask questions, share with your friends, tell them you're at sacred space with Artie. Don't tell anyone, like be completely anonymous and just lurk in the background. Anything is absolutely okay. Because again, the nourishment from sacred space comes from this held space and your presence and attention and the protection and held space that everyone else is doing for each other, right? In other words, from what you are, not from what you do or provide. So if you want to listen and fold laundry or smoke a cigarette or whatever, you can do that. You don't have to pay attention. If you want to come and go as you please, you can watch later on the replay, watch only 5 minutes and you don't watch the whole session. That's totally okay. This space is for all of us to basically have this feeling of no fear, threat, or control, which is its own kind of thing, if you will. And you can do, as we've said in past sessions, you can do sacred space on your own when you meditate, when you go for a long run, all the sort of examples we've named in the past. But here, when we do sacred space together, it has that extra kind of special kind of quality, because when a group of people come together in sacred space, all of us together tend to amplify that effect, right? So if I stumble in holding sacred space for myself and I start blaming myself because my tech isn't working and I sent the stream to the wrong place, it's everyone else still holding sacred space for each other and for me, where I get to get back on my surfboard and ride that wave that everyone else is continuing to maintain for me and for us. So it's pretty sweet. It's pretty sweet. So anyway, this is what I propose. And if you are not okay with that, that's totally okay. There's no fear, threat, or control for you to stay in sacred space or even come to sacred space in the first place. But just as a heads up, in the next 30 seconds or so, we are about to cross the threshold into our shared sacred space together. So if that is not your intended destination, now is the time to get off this plane, because we're about to take off. And so now we will pause to give you a moment to withdraw from the group or stay in the group as you would like. To make your own decision. Whatever you like is okay. And if you don't stay in sacred space, that's totally okay. We'll catch up with you later in profane space. We'll still hang out still. We'll still be friends. No worries at all. So I'll just give you all a moment now to make your selection. Okay. All right. Now, then for the rest of us, we will now move forward together into sacred space. And as we cross the threshold together now into sacred space, I'll just remind everyone, myself included, that we are in a space where we will hold confidentiality / anonymization, no fear, threat, or control, no commerce, no recommendations, and no expectation of participation. All right, here we are finally in sacred space together. I think this is good. Okay, I think everyone's okay. And welcome to Sacred Space, our 47th consecutive session of Sacred Space. And thank you so much for being here. So before I dive into the topic and the fairy tale, so Gary has once again been gracious enough to join us and select a fairy tale for us to read, and we'll do all that this week again. But last week, we mentioned that we've been talking about embodiment and all these other things. And people expressed an interest in sort of getting a little bit of spice in the stew of other kinds of exercises. Because these fairy tales are fantastic, but they're kind of intellectual, which, I love and Gary loves and, hopefully all of you love as well. But there are other modalities we can do as well. So there are two things I thought we'd do today. Just a quick, minute or two exercise now, just to sort of help get us a little bit more into our bodies as we go into the more intellectual mythopoetic discussion. And then after the story, we'll have our little exercise related to the story. But then after that exercise, I'll do a little bit of a meditation as well, just to kind of get you fully soaked into this delicious kind of feeling. And then kind of I'll close the session and send you on your way. I don't want to do a meditation right now because you all will be like, if I'm assuming you like it and I'm any good, you'll all be blissed out and you'll be falling asleep during my talk. And I'll be like, hey, wake up. It would be very unseemly of me to do that during sacred space. So I will just leave the more relaxing meditation toward the end. Okay. But for now, what I'll do is just a quick exercise intended to just very quickly kind of get the tempo of our body and mind and a little bit more of a linkage, if you will. Okay. Oh, and again, remember we're in sacred space, so there's no expectation of participation. Do this exercise will only take a minute or two. Do this only if you want. No expectation of participation. And this is one of the things that I love about being online, right? Because if we were in like a yoga studio, you'd see everyone getting in their like superpositions and everything, which is fine. But then even there, you might feel pressure. Here, it's like, you could be in a pub, with a pint, hunched over a basket of fish and chips, and everyone else is doing the meditation. And that's totally okay. Okay, so let's do this. So just sit as you are, sit comfortably, no special position required, and start with just a medium breath. Okay. And then only if you want, take a slightly deeper breath. Okay. And the first thing I would invite you to do, only if you want, is to notice how you perceive sound, which is there's typically a specific sound that you're listening for. And right now, hopefully, the sound you're listening for is the sound of my voice. Okay. And now as you're listening to the sound of my voice, what I would also like you to do is to take a pause and listen for a different sound that is not my voice, that is not the sound you were listening for. So for instance, for me here in my home, in addition to the sound of my voice, I can hear the humming of the refrigerator or some appliance in the kitchen in the next room. And so just very briefly, you can put your attention on that other sound, the sound you were not listening for, only if you want. And you can listen for another different sound that was not the one you were listening for. So for me, I hear a crow cawing outside. I hear the sound of my breath. I hear the distant ambient whoosh of traffic. Okay. Next, we do the same thing, only if you want, but with touch. Okay. So just like with sound, there's typically a touch that you're touching for. So if you're sitting at your computer, maybe it's your mouse or your keyboard. If you're holding your phone, then it's the feel of your phone in your hand. So there's the touch that you're touching for. That's perfectly fine. And then what I would like you to do is to rest your attention on a different sensation of touch that you were not touching for, but it's a touch that's still there. So for me, for instance, it is the feeling of my shirt on my shoulder. Not the touch I was paying attention to, but the touch is still there. The feeling of air on my cheek. And by the way, I can still hear the crows cawing outside. The feeling of my glasses on my nose. The feeling of the air on my nostril as I breathe. And the feeling of the cushion of my chair on my legs and on my backside. Okay. How's that? Okay. Just a little bit of a quick exercise to bring us a little bit into our bodies before we do our story and reflection. All right. All right. Let's get going if you're ready. So for this week, our story is I was thinking this would not be the one that blissed everyone out, but now I'm feeling kind of like I want to take a nap too. Thank goodness Gary's up next. So the topic for this week is the importance of following your delight. So in this session, our weekly fairy tale brainstorm brought us a little bit deeper into the concept of delight and how it leads beyond healing, right? Beyond just the delight between inner masculine and inner feminine, into fully following our bliss as well, how healing actually leads into bliss through this mechanism and thread of delight. And I think in the course of reading the story, some pro tips will emerge also on the options available to us on how we manage this path of delight forward, right? From healing into bliss onto our life paths going forward. And so the way we'll enter into this today is we'll do a folk tale, I think, from the Hindu tradition. And then we'll just let the golden thread of delight actually lead us from there. So Gary, if you are there, if you're awake, come on screen.
Hi, Artie. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Gary. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Embodiment, schmodiment. I'm too relaxed to do this session now. Whose idea was this? This is terrible.
I was not falling asleep. I was more awake than before because that was like time travel. I was just zipped past 9 years ago to the time I did this exercise like for the very first time. So it was just straight up to that point, and I could feel myself sitting on the bed that I was sitting on, and I was like feeling what I felt on that day, hearing the sounds I could hear that day. It was weird.
That's wonderful.
At the end of it, I was like,
really? Yeah, it's been 9 years since the last time you've done this exercise?
Yeah. I haven't thought of it.
All right. It's a sacred space. All right. No fear, thought of control. All right. That's fine. Whatever.
I mean, absolutely admitting that I haven't done it since.
No, that's great. All right. Do you want to tell us about the story you selected this week?
Yeah. So the story basically at this time I picked up for no good reason, and except for the fact that it kind of reminded me of my childhood, because like the tone and the language and the vocabulary and the characters and everything was just something I'm so familiar with growing up. And I think I was telling you that those were the kind of stories that I read on these cheap paperbacks that you picked up off the street. And you read the stories, there'll be like one or two stories, and then once you read them, you're done, you throw them. This is when I was probably 8 or 9 years old, so long way back. So I don't remember any of those stories from that kind of tradition. And I didn't even know where to go looking for them if I had to. And suddenly I came upon the story in a collection of folk tales. I was like, okay, it just sounds exactly like one of those stories. It was just so delightful to just go back and read that. So it was lovely to kind of have that experience again. And I picked it up and then I talked it out with you, and I had absolutely no insight into how the symbols spoke to me. I was just so soaked in the memories and the nostalgia of the whole thing. But I think it came up with a wonderful insight, nevertheless.
Yeah, it actually led us somewhere quite interesting. So I love it. Do you want to share the story with us then?
Yeah. Okay. So.
All right. Great.
The story is it's called Brahma Rakshasa. It's a typically Sanskrit word, and Brahma Rakshasa is a kind of demon. So this story is about a particular kind of demon. So we'll learn as we go through the story what kind of demon it is and what traits it has. But the story starts at the beginning in a small town in southern India, where there is a Brahmin, right? Typically priestly class of community. If you're not familiar with the Indian social system of yore, right? So there was this Brahmin who was very, very poor, and he lived by collecting alms every day, and that wasn't enough. And he was so poor and miserable that he decided that he would want to leave town and find his luck in a town in the northern part of India, on the bank of the river Ganges, or Ganga as we call it, Varanasi. Now, Varanasi is a typically the ancient town of learning and higher education. It was also a town, it's a holy place. So many people seeking all kinds of wisdom, knowledge, inner seeking would go to this place and spend time there. And therefore, it also was a town which offered sanctuary to a lot of sort of helpless people as well. So our hero of the story, this Brahmin, decided that he would want to go to Varanasi and see how his luck would turn out, right? And he had he didn't have many belongings. He tied up a bundle, and he just had enough for one day's supplies, one day of food. He hoped that on the way he would just beg and make do. And as he set walking, and this was back in those days where all journeys were by on foot, so he kept walking the entire day. And as sunset approached, he entered a thick wilderness, and he had to keep going, hoping that he would find a place to rest. And close to sunset, he actually found a beautiful lake. And at sunset, he's required to do his evening prayers and eat his meal. So he went to the edge of the lake to wash himself. And as he was about to do so, he heard a voice. And this voice was threatening. It said, "Don't put your foot in this water. You're not permitted to do this." And he looked around to see who had said that, and he saw nothing. So he ignored the threat and he continued to wash his hands and feet. And then he sat down, performed his prayers, and then sat down to eat. But even before he even sat down to perform his prayers, he heard that voice again saying, "Don't you perform your prayers. You're not allowed to do this." And he still couldn't find the source of voice. So he said, "Okay, I'm just going to ignore that." Continue to eat. And the same kind of threatening voice came again, telling him not to eat his meal. And, he just couldn't figure out what was going on. So finally, he tied up his bundle again, got up. He thought that he still had some time while it was still light. So he would walk up to the nearest village and find some shelters to sleep. But even before he'd taken a step, the same voice came up again, said, "Don't you dare take a step. You're not allowed to do that." So now the Brahmin was annoyed. So he was like, he spoke up and said, "Who are you? And why would you forbid me from doing even the most reasonable thing?" Right? So once he said that, the voice replied back, and it seemed to come from a tree close to him. And that voice said, "I am a Brahma Rakshasa, a kind of demon, right? My name is Ganapriya." And Ganapriya in Sanskrit translates to the lover of music. "And in my former life, I was a Brahmin like you. And I learned all the intricacies of music, and I was quite an expert in music. But I was unwilling to impart my hard-earned knowledge to other people. So the gods were so displeased with me for this that I was turned into this demon in this life. And even now, it's not like I've paid enough. Even now, I'm being tortured because at a distance from here, there's a ruined temple in which there's worship that goes on every day, but the worship is done in such a crude way, such crude ceremonies, and there is a piper who plays this wind instrument. It's called nadaswara, this pipe. He plays it so badly. It just causes me so much torture just to listen to that. So my only hope of escape is that, as a Brahmin, you will rescue me from this tree and find me a shelter or some other tree a little distance away, so that I can be spared of that awful music. Because if I continue any longer, this is going to be the death of me. I can't bear this anymore. Right? And in return, if you do me this huge favor, you could ask me any boon, and I will grant it. So, the Brahmin could hear the distress in the voice of this demon, and he said, well, there's really only one thing for me to ask, because I'm extremely poor, and if you promise to make me rich, then I can do you a favor, which is to remove you to a good distance away from that temple. And the demon thought about it, and it said, right, well, there's this thing here called fate, and every person must undergo what is given to them by fate. And I see that you have 5 more years of poverty in your fate, so you will have to unfortunately suffer that. But after those 5 years, I shall go and possess a princess of a kingdom nearby. And none of the incantations, none of the magic healing anybody is going to administer is going to work until you come there and present yourself, right? And the king will promise you rewards, and you can start the cure. And when I see you, I will leave her. And that way you'll be eligible to a lot of rewards. So this sounded good. So they had a deal, and the Brahmin and the demon came to a deal together. The Brahmin removed the demon from that tree, found another tree quite a distance away where he felt comfortable. He settled down there. And then our hero pursued his way back to his, the destination that he wanted to go, which is Varanasi. And he reached there in about 6 months. And he had to live out his 5 years. And for all those 5 years, he lived by the riverbank, and he performed all sorts of rituals and ablutions and all of that to purify himself. And then when 5 years were complete, he thought of this promise that this demon had made to him. So he returned back south to the kingdom, which is Mysore, where the demon had promised that he will possess the princess. And he took shelter in an old woman's house after he reached there, and he inquired what was going on. And the old woman told him that, this is what has happened. The princess of this country, she's the only daughter of the king. She's been possessed by this furious demon for the last 5 months. And everyone, every magician, every exorcist, every healer has tried to cure her, but nothing's come out of it. And the king has promised a huge fortune to anyone who will be able to cure her. So now the Brahmin was very happy that the demon had kept his promise. So the next day, he quickly presented himself at the king's court and offered to heal the princess. And when he was allowed to go into where the princess was seated, he introduced himself. I mean, of course, it was the demon that was consciously inhabiting her. Right? So he introduced himself, reminded who he was, and said, I've come to get the return favor, right? And as soon as the demon heard his voice and heard his name and everything, was quite happy to fulfill his promise. He instantly left the princess. Now, when this deal was made, a tiny detail that I forgot, but the demon had said that, I will do this for you, but you must remember that this is the only one-time thing that we will do. And you must never, ever come to any other place where I inhabit. And if you do show up the next time, I will kill you with a single blow. Right? So before the demon left, when he was talking to the Brahmin, he reminded him of the same thing. He said, I'm leaving now, but remember, this is the one last time we meet. The next time I see you, I will kill you with just one blow. And the Brahmin was happy with that. He was quite happy to earn his one-time reward and settle down in the same kingdom. He married a beautiful girl, and he soon became the father of 3 children. A full 10 years passed, and he led quite a happy, contented life. And meanwhile, while he was leading this life, he was intrigued by this art of exorcism, right? Since it started with this demon. He practiced the art of exorcism. He became famous. He became a master of it, and he was quite well known throughout the kingdom as a master magician. And meanwhile, the demon, after leaving this place, went on to go to several other places, so it finally landed in another kingdom and possessed the princess of that kingdom. And the same thing kind of repeated itself, where so many magicians were called in, they were asked to help, but nothing happened. And finally, rumors about this master magician of Mysore who had healed the princess there reached the other king. So he wrote a letter to the king of Mysore, requesting him if he could avail the services of this great magician. And now this was a tricky spot. Does he take up the offer, and which is like walking to certain death? That's not part of the deal, showing up again in front of the same demon. Or does he refuse and lose all the goodwill and all the favor of his king, and possibly incur the wrath of another king as well? So what would he do? He thought about it and he said, I prefer the latter. I think I would rather die than lose the goodwill of the king. So I would just take this up. So he settled all his affairs. He wrote a will, left his estate to his children, told his wife about everything. He confided in her that this is what was going on. And then he left for this other kingdom. It took him a month to reach there. And he tried, even after reaching, he kind of tried to postpone his exorcisms and made up excuses. But finally, he realized that there was just nothing else to do but to just go in, because he was simply prolonging his misery. So finally, he thought, okay, the time has come. I would just walk into my death. And he went into the king's court. He was shown into the room where the princess was seated. And just as he was about to go in, a thought came to his head. And he walked in boldly and said, "Will you abandon her, you demon, or should I bring the piper from the ruined temple near the woods? He's waiting just outside." And as soon as the name of that piper fell on the ears of the demon, he just threw down the pole that he was holding. It just fell at the feet of the Brahmin and started sobbing. He said, "Oh, my brother, I will never, ever look back. I'll run away from here, but please, please don't ever bring that piper to me. Please, no. And the Brahmin said, agreed. And at this, the demon just disappeared. And our hero was rewarded again for being a master exorcist, and he became doubly famous, throughout the world. So that's the story. Artie, you there? Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that story. I loved it even more the second time around. So thank you for sharing that. And I'll start with my usual question, which is where do you enter into that story?
Like I said, it's kind of, it was reminiscent of the stories I'd read in childhood. So at first, it just made me very happy to read it, just familiarity and the kind of, to read something like that again after years. But also the whole lightheartedness of it, in the sense of there is a demon, but there are death threats. It's a really powerful demon, but the whole thing is just so casual and so lighthearted. You don't really sense a real danger, but also at the same time, you're given a very tricky situation. Like, how do you go left? Do you go right? Do you take this choice? Or do you take that choice? And that really tricky. But then at the end, it's just such a release just to read it that way. So I love the fact that it toys around with something as grave as having two really painful choices, but at the same time walking boldly into it and making light of it. Yeah,
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna dive into some of the notes I've made, and feel free to pop in and out. I'm not getting your video. I can still hear you. I'm not getting your video on my side. I would refresh, but I'll probably wreck the entire session. So I'm just not even going to touch anything right now.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, yeah, you're fine.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, so before I dive into my notes, for those of you who may be new to Live Sacred Space, or new to these past several months of fairy tales that we've been reading, I just want to give a quick kind of thumbnail of. Oh yeah, great, you're back. That's perfect. Your video is good again. Okay. Is that when we do our healing work here, when we read dreams for our advisees, when we read fairy tale, myth, the way we read these things is all of a piece, is all the same. And the way we do it is that we read the dream and we regard every major actor in the dream as being symbolic of a different part of your own inner self. A different part of your own inner self, okay? And so here what that means is that the demon, the music-loving demon, is a part of you. The Brahmin is a part of you. The kings are a part of you. The princesses are a part of you. Ganga, the river Ganga, is a part of you for sure. And what you do when you read the dream then, or the fairy tale, is you start off with the cast of characters. You hit the play button, you let the video, you let the story kind of unspool and unwind. And then you look out for who's doing what to whom. And then that is how we think about what the sort of message or the message or the insight is that we take from this. And in past, I mean, we're on like session 47 now, so it's hard to sort of do a full sort of debrief of everything we've covered. But we've talked about how we read these stories. We read them not allegorically, where it's like this fear, threat, and control. So the moral is you want to be good, you don't want to be the bad guy. We don't really read it allegorically. We read it symbolically, where we read it for, we kind of look at it as a kind of diorama of this part of inner human life and human experience. And then we take what insights we wish to take from that. Okay. So just in a nutshell, that's kind of how we think about reading these stories. And here, for this story, this is a very lovely story. The way I read the structure of the story is that typically in dreams, when you have two of anything, twins, or, when you have dreams, right? You have two guys there, or two dogs, and one runs to the left, one runs to the right. Or you have a dream that one follows another. So you have a dream that I'm like driving in a car, and then my friend is sitting next to me, and then all this stuff happens, and then right after that, right, like in the same evening, or the next day, or the next week, you have basically the exact same dream with one thing shifted around, right? Instead of a car, we're driving a boat, but it's the same friend. Right. So when you have two of anything where they're basically twins, but there are certain things that are different, it is often taken as a motif of a kind of crossroads where you are presented with two paths, and it's for you to choose, right? Door number one or door number two. Okay. And here with this dream, I feel these exact same kinds of physics where they both have been Brahmin, right? The first used to be a Brahmin, now he's a demon. And the second is a Brahmin. So you have door number one and door number two. And right off the bat, right, door number one, the music-loving demon, is a path explicitly where he had been granted all of these divine gifts of music, okay? And for our purposes, literally, divinely given delight. Divinely given delight. And now from the previous story, we know that music we took as a form of delight. And now we have music showing up here again in a very sort of hidden coded form. But then because we read it as delight last week, this week we see music again. And we go ahead, pick up the ball of delight and start running down the field just to see what happens. Now, you may be thinking, well, I have a degree in psychology. I have a degree in folklore and mythology. I've never heard of this term of like music as delight. I mean, actually, in certain traditions, it is explicitly delight. But you may be thinking, well, I don't understand. Last week's story was a Sicilian story, a Southern Italian story. This week is Indian. Just because music represented delight in the Sicilian system, how do you think it? Where do you get off thinking it represents delight in the Indian story? And I wasn't going to go into this, but this is more of sort of the inside baseball of how you do dream reading in these kinds of details. And the quick answer is that if you're going to argue in linear sort of rational terms, you may as well argue that music doesn't represent delight in either case, right? What happened was when the Sicilian story came to us, we decided to interpret it as delight. And then it yielded certain kinds of insight. Okay, that was all sort of internally consistent with all the symbols and archetypes. Then we have this sort of value. I mean, it's almost like a programmer. We've declared the class, and music equals delight. Then the second story comes to us the very next week, and there's all this stuff that happens, but the symbol of music is also encoded. So you can choose then to take it as the same way. When you have dreams and you track them over the course of weeks or even months or even years, it ends up becoming this ongoing, lifelong dialogue between you and, let's just call it this counterpart on the dream side. Let's just call it that, okay? And the way you can think about it is that you can think about it as being similar to like a game of charades, right? Sort of that party game, where you have a thing that you're trying to communicate to your partner, and you say, sounds like, and you try to give you try to pantomime and act out, and your partner tries to guess, right? Now, when you play charades with a partner, you're collaborating with them. You're on the same team, right? You can't use words explicitly, but through symbols, you're trying to get a bit of meaning, encoded meaning from you to the partner. And the beauty with charades is that when you play with a partner, let's say like your spouse or your sort of long-term partner, when you play with your partner over multiple rounds, or a sibling and family, right? The two of you start to accrue a kind of shared vocabulary because you played so many rounds together, right? You don't talk directly. It's not technically cheating, right? But when you've been playing together for a while, you realize, oh, the last time, like a couple months ago at the Christmas party, we played charades, and I did this, right? And you knew it meant violin. Or actually, I did this and I meant viola, not violin. And you kept saying violin, and we lost the round because what I actually meant was viola. And you're like, that's so stupid. Viola is so, sort of obscure. But now you have that shared experience. So now at the, whatever, the next party, you do this and you give a wink, and your partner says viola, not violin. And everyone's like, oh, come on, you're cheating. Right? But it's not, because it's not that you worked out a system. You just have the shared accrued vocabulary. Okay. And this is the pattern that I've seen in reading dreams for advisees as well. Now, this isn't any part of like a larger theory or anything. I'm just giving you my own practical observations and experience from my own work in healing and reading dreams for advisees. Just to give I probably over the last several years read something like 8,000 to 10,000 dreams for advisees and life group advising and different sort of scenarios. And this is the pattern I've seen again and again. So if the dream alludes to a symbol like music, right? He's your charade partner, right? And you say, I'm going to read that music symbol as delight. Even if that wasn't the original intent, right? A good charades partner will just roll with it, right? And now, because it's like, okay, send up the music symbol. And then the other side is like, oh, delight. And you're like looking at each other going, that's not exactly what we meant, but okay, just keep going, right? So now we know whatever we thought it was originally, you think it's delight. So then if in the very next week I send up music again, right, you can bet your bottom dollar that it does mean delight, because it's like they heard me say delight. And even if it was wrong, it's like, that's what I think it is. So if they want to symbolize something else, they'll send something else. But if they're like, okay, let's hit delight again, they're going to send up music. Okay. Now, long story short, as you do this sort of dream work over the years, you start to accrue the shared vocabulary. And as a result, the level of messaging back and forth between you and like let's just call it the inner counterpart, right? Or the muse, right? Or the monkey mind genius. Those of you who have done the Bliss program with me, this is classic monkey mind genius, right? Coming to you through the channel of dreams. The level of sophistication of the messaging back and forth can be very, very like exquisite, because you have this more advanced vocabulary to work with back and forth, and it is absolutely custom to you. Okay. So then here, that's why we hit the same symbol of music again. In the very next story, I'm just going to take the ball and run with it, and I go ahead and read music as the light. And this is how it happened in my brainstorm call with Gara. It's like, I'm going to take music as the light. She's like, okay. And neither of us knew where it went, and we just kind of rolled it forward, and I'll give you the notes on what we found. So what happens here is in door number 1, right, the demon. The demon accrues delight in the form of music to a very high form, to a very rarefied high form, and does not pass it on. He keeps this delight for himself. And then he ends up in a tree with a piper that's playing horrible music, right? Now, is this his punishment, or is this pressure and containment to effect a transformation? Now, from the very first session of these sacred space sessions back in March of 2020. Right, from the very first session, the theme was transformation versus punishment. And basically, you can read this very episode of being stuck in a tree as punishment. Oh, the gods were like, you didn't share your delight, so now we're going to punish you. Or we can read it as a transformation, which is how I tend to choose to read things. Right? So he did not share his delight. And now in his next form, from the Brahmin to the Deva form, to the demon form, he now lives in a world where this awful piper's music continues, and it hits his own ear. Why is that? It's obvious. It's precisely because it's not a punishment. It's simply a consequence. It's a cause and effect. There doesn't need to be some high court punishing you. If you withhold your delight, then you end up living in a world where you're the only one who has delight, and other people who play music will play awful music. Right? In other words, you have created this world for your own self, not as a punishment. It's just a consequence. Right? To take it a sort of another example, if I am just this like person and I emotionally abuse everyone around me, right? The people who don't speak emotional abuse go away, and the people who are used to hearing emotional abuse and used to speaking back in terms of emotional abuse end up sticking around because they're not bothered by it at all. Pretty soon what happens, what accrues around me, is that I end up living in a social milieu, right? Where generally people around me are emotionally abusive, like they take it from me and they give it from me. Is that punishment or is it transformation? You can read it either way. But if you read it as transformation, it's like, well, I mean, I created this world and now I'm marinating in it, right? And you can say, well, it's not my fault. It's my parents taught me how to be emotionally abusive. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, your parents then like were themselves wounded, right? And then they create a world around them that is emotionally abusive. You are part of that world because as their child, you are an extension of them. And then you, in your adulthood, you speak the language you were taught, not your fault, but not technically their fault either, right? Nobody's born speaking this kind of emotionally abusive language. It is learned from somewhere. Right? So you end up speaking to it and you create that world around you as well. The outer world reflects the things that are going on within you. That's what we mean when we say that. So you create this world and then you marinate in it. And so door number one, this demon, this music-loving demon, is the Brahmin that had this delight divinely given, right? Rare high form music. And he chose not to share it, not to teach it. He chose not to let this delight flow through him in his life. And now he lives in a world bereft of that delight. Okay. That's door number one. Door number two then is then his transformation. Is that he comes into engagement with door number two. Door number two is this living Brahmin who has, let's just tally the score, no ego power, no nourishment, no delight, nothing. He starts at 0 and encounters this demon in his state of pressure and containment, caught in the tree. And the first thing the demon does, right, in his state of emotional sort of bereavement, is he threatens the Brahmin. Right? You can't do your washing, you can't do your prayers, you can't do your sacrifice, don't you dare do that. He disrupts the Brahmin's own flow. And these details matter here. Very notably, his threats are empty, and we'll come back to that. Right? The demon's threats are empty. He threatens him like 3 or 4 times. The Brahmin ignores, he's like, I don't know. And he just carries on. And no harm befalls the Brahmin. He doesn't hit him with a lightning bolt. He doesn't do anything. Okay. And the thing implied by this symbol of empty threats, to me, the way I read this, mythopoetically, is that when the path of door number one, stuffing your delight down, not sharing your delight, when the voice of that path threatens you, you can safely ignore those threats. Right? So for instance, let's make this into a more concrete example. Let's say the life path of stuffing down your bliss and delight threatens you with things like Oh, you want to play the violin or the viola? You want to play music? You want to be an actor? You want to be whatever. You want to be an accountant? Whatever it is that is not approved of. Oh, really? That's what you want to do? Well, who's going to love you? How are you going to make money? What will the neighbors think? Everyone's going to laugh at you. You're going to be absolutely humiliated, right? That's what the life of stuffing down your bliss, stuffing down your delight and not sharing it, that's how it threatens you. It threatens you just like the demon threatened the Brahmin. Except in real life, the threats sound like who's going to love you? How will you make money? You're going to starve. You're going to be penniless. What will the neighbors think? No one will love you. And the point in the symbolism of the story is those are empty threats. If you continue through on the path of delight, you can safely ignore them. Now, this is not to say that if you come from a family that is a dynasty of like doctors, lawyers, investment bankers, captains of industry, and you leave and go be a painter or a ballet dancer, right? It's not to say if you do that, you will make money, or that everyone will love you, or that you won't be humiliated, right? I'm not saying those triggers won't fire, right? It's not to say the threats won't happen, but rather that if you do follow your delight all the way through, those things may happen, but you won't care. That's the point, right? Because the Brahmin very specifically is doing his ablutions and all of his purifications. And if he's struck down by a demon, actually struck down, which he isn't, but even if he were actually struck down, he would go to heaven. Like all the gods would be like, well, he was doing his proper thing, what he was supposed to be doing. And that demon struck down. If anyone's going to get punished, it's the demon. The demon's get another, the demon's going to get another 5 to 10 years in the tree, right? So in other words, symbolically, the way I read that here is that, okay, if I go down this path and everyone's threatening me, indeed, I may not make as much money as if I went into banking. I may not get to marry that girl, but it doesn't matter. Right? If I'm going down that path and that girl's only going to marry someone who checks the box regardless of what's inside, then I'm probably better off not marrying her in the first place. Right? So the societal, the technical threat is invalid from that perspective. Okay. So the Brahmin then ignores this and nothing happens to him. So that's good. But he has no delight. He doesn't have a lot of power. He has no money. So money is a form of symbol of ego power. So he has no money. And then this demon voice, right? Now, again, the Brahmin is a symbol of a part of you. And the demon voice is also a symbol of a part of you. These are voices within you engaging. Now, this threatening voice of the path that stuffs down bliss and delight continues on: all bark, no bite. All bark, no bite. But he barks pretty loud and annoyingly. So then the Brahmin does inquire. And he says, well, what's the matter here? What's even going on? Who are you? And this is exactly the same bit of physics that we see in fairy tale after fairy tale that I've mentioned. Just like the Fisher King asking the ultimate healing question, which is basically the same question. What is the matter here? What ails the king? Right? Who is this in the tree? Who is this voice talking to me? He doesn't say, oh, empty threat, I'm just going to move on. He turns around, turns back to the voice in the tree, and inquires after him. Right? So after all these sessions of fairy tales, if you haven't been hit over the head dozens of times at this point already in the story series, here it is again. The key to healing is to have the courage to ask, what is going on here? What is the matter? Even though it may be terrifying, even though it may be easier to brush it off, to keep calm and carry on, right? Just stone-faced, keep a stiff upper lip, just shut up and get back on the bus and keep moving. Nevertheless, in multiple traditions and cultures across time and geography, the catalyzing healing act is to have the courage to say out loud to your own inner self, what is the matter here? What is that voice threatening me? How do I actually feel? What ails me? Once you ask that question, the demon in the tree tells you everything. For those of you who have done healing work and healing programs with me, this is the lost board member. This is the day 3 of 7-day healing. To stop and say, right, what is the part that I have stuffed down that is trapped in the tree? That's like screaming bloody murder, and everyone's like pretending. It's like, oh, I don't hear anything. Do you hear anything? Carry on with whatever it is we're doing, right? Until he escalates his complaint, and all these other things get upended in your life, right? And the healing action is in day 3 to do that interview, to basically turn around and ask, what is the matter here? I mean, all the questions from day 3 are the healing questions. Are you okay? Are you scared? Are you hurt? Do you have a message for me? All those things. Okay. So that's the first key. Then the second key act of healing is that the Brahmin deals with the demon in good faith. He gets him out of the tree. He does not try to short circuit the 5 years of poverty. He serves them out, actually continuing to do his like pious rituals on the bank of the river Ganges, right? These two are two inner sides of your own self. They are both within you. And the key second act, the key second act, in addition to asking what is the matter, is once you ask, to deal with the voice in good faith. In good faith. Okay. Now, there's something about the Brahmin rescuing this demon that is kind of the key to everything. Because he rescues the demon, and then it turns out that the Brahmin's own delight turns out not to be music, but his own delight turns out to be the art and craft of exorcism itself. Right? And so, and very tellingly, if you look at the physics of the story, his discovery of his delight in the form of exorcism starts precisely with this interaction. When he hears the voice that is threatening and upset, and he turns around and he asks, what is the matter? He then comes in touch with his own delight in the act of exorcising the demon. This gives you actually the secret, not just of bliss, right? Because we always say healing leads directly into bliss. When you start asking your own lost board member, what is the matter? It turns out, you know, your bliss is actually also in the lost board member's like luggage. When you finally invite him in and he starts unpacking, he like, you know, throws these gold bars on the bed that you know is in the bedroom that you've given him as a guest bed, and you're like, what are those shiny things? It's like, oh, that's just your delight, that's your bliss. And recovering your lost board member is the secret of doing that. Yeah, we don't have time to get into the physics of why that is, but in the stories we've done, when you do healing, that all comes out as well. But the secret of the art of exorcism itself, which can be taken as a kind of analog for healing, right? Because you have this troublesome demonic voice in you, like threatening you, saying you're worthless, nobody loves you, you're not doing good enough, you'll never be good enough, you're not rich enough, popular enough, skinny enough, blah, 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 right? The secret to exercising that is not to put a gun to its head or to force it out, right? The secret to the art of exorcism is not force, is not fear, threat, and control, right? But to work in collaboration with it, to reconcile with it, in the sacred, not in the profane, right? Which is why, I mean, not to make any medical comments here, but when you have this voice that is like screaming bloody murder, and your reaction to it from like, you know, the current sort of industrial system is to here, take this pill, we'll nuke it, and we will shut the voice up, right? That is, I mean, there's this extra dimension of violence that you may feel with that approach. It may be medically necessary, and that's fine, right? But it's only because it's gotten to the point where it's like there's just, it almost feels beyond reconcilable. So you just try to nuke the bejesus out of the voice. But as you all know, that doesn't, I mean, that's not a sustainable solution as well. There's always a path of reconciliation. It's just the farther afield you go, the more terrifying it becomes. Because you think, how could anyone possibly forgive me for everything I've done to stuff them down? But they do, right? The demon always comes around. when you come around. So the exorciser is not this heroic rescuer slaying the dragon. He is the one who, he's almost the dragon whisperer, right? He talks to the dragon, he talks to the demon, and figures out a plan, makes a deal, right? And then figures out how to help him. He makes a bargain, and he acts in good faith. So the sort of triple sort of formula is the courage to even ask the question in the first place, to make a deal, right, which he does, and then to act in good faith. We see this in story after story after story. And in response, the demon ends up acting in good faith too. The demon doesn't cheat the Brahmin either. So in healing, actually, we follow this exact principle of mythopoetic physics. For healing people, the lost board member is the key, is the demon, if you will. And the key is not to force or control or to cure or to berate this part of you, but to come to reconciliation, right? So then, he takes this path of talking to the past failure, because you can think of these as door number 1, door number 2, but they're both a part of you, right? So there's a part of you that's already gone down this path of like not sharing their delight. And then this Brahmin comes as like the next at bat, right? The next attempt, okay? And he kind of mythopoetically engages with the past very angry, frustrated, threatening demon because he's failed, right? And then somehow the demon transmits your delight from music into exorcism, okay, in the physics of this story as a symbol. He then picks up his golden thread of delight and moves it forward. And the question is this Brahmin going to, this time around, right, is he going to push all the way through and actually share out his delight as well? Or will he somehow, out of fear, threat, and control, cinch down and clamp down on it? Okay, which is what the demon already did. So the Brahmin goes ahead, he marries, he's rich, the demon comes through on all his promises, and he gets to be known for his craft of exorcism and healing, if you will. His own delight, this delight of exorcism, develops over the years. He gets better and better. And he doesn't share, he doesn't keep it just for himself, he shares it out. And he gets known far and wide. Okay, so he develops just fine, and then we reach the final test, the final sort of fork in the road between door number 1 and door number 2. In the final test, he is asked, the Brahmin, to bring his delight forward, even to the point where he will die for sure. He will lose his life. Okay, and this is in the story when Gary was saying, the king, is, has another sort of princess that's being sort of kept, possessed by this demon. It's the same demon. He knows it's the same demon. And he could run away. He's already got his money. He's got his family. He could run away. He could say no. Or, if he accepts this invitation, he's a dead man, right? It's not in his MO. It's not in his nature to try and actually cheat the demon. He does get out of it in the end. I'll explain sort of how I read that. It's not in his, he doesn't go in thinking he's going to cheat the demon. The demon has not cheated him, and he also acts in good faith, right? He asks the healing question, he makes a deal, and he acts in good faith. Even to the end, he acts in good faith. However, he can still act in good faith with a demon by saying, I'm not going to engage the demon at all. I'm just going to go away. I'm going to run away, or I'm going to say no and take my chances in the profane world with these 2 kings now being pissed off at me. Okay. And at that critical moment, instead of withholding his gift of exorcism, just like withholding the gift of music, he says, no, I'm going to unclench. I'm going to let this gift in me flow out, even if it means I die. Okay. And this is an extraordinary kind of choice. Now, there's kind of two ways, not two ways, they're not mutually exclusive, but there are kind of two levels on which we can read this, right? The first is he is this inner masculine figure. Both the Brahmins are masculine, right? And so the function of the inner masculine is, of course, protection, boundary control, and manifestation. And he's been doing a fabulous job of all three. Here again, his first thought, his impulse, as the inner masculine of the inner kingdom, is to protect his family, right, against the king's anger. And if he loses his own life in the process, then so be it. And obviously, this impulse is echoed in the modern world as well. I was telling Gary during our brainstorm, for me as a father, and back when I was a husband, but sort of as a sort of family person, and as a young dad of, at the time, it was just my daughter, and she was like a newborn. I can't tell you the kind of relief, and the fathers and men out there, I'm sure will all have similar stories, that like washes over you as a father and a man. When you finally, your firstborn is born and you finally get your life insurance policy in place. When my daughter was like, just like a couple weeks old, and the life insurance policy finally sort of kicked in, everything was approved. And that, okay, like even if I get hit by a bus, everything, at least financially, is more or less going to be taken care of. Right? The insurance policy was such a relief, right? It's just like that inner masculine sort of power within us, reflected in the outer world. If your role in the outer world is man, right? All want to serve the thing that is bigger than us, right? It is a fabulous thing when we find that larger thing to serve, which the vision that comes from inner feminine. And as any dad, will tell you, it's like, oh, the minute that policy kicked in, we were like, had this moment of like, oh my gosh, that's fantastic. I'm actually allowed to die now. And of course, everyone around you is like, you're nuts. What are you talking about? It's like, this feeling of like, I have some coverage, I have some backup. And the thing that I have dedicated myself to making sure, crosses the finish line is a little bit more insured, right, and assured. So when you find that thing that's larger than you to serve, that is literally delightful, right? That sense of delight we can call your bliss. And it's a huge relief because, once you have that and you sort of zero in on it, you kind of know why you even exist in the first place. And so specifically with regard to bliss, just another side note, this is actually one of the key markers of bliss, is that when it is fully developed and like flowing along in you, right? One of the markers to sort of make sure it is your bliss or the highest form of your bliss. And typically when you're at this point, you don't even need to ask the question, but just as a triple check, right? Quality assurance. The litmus test question typically is, would you be willing to die for your bliss? Right? So this Brahmin can withhold his gift of exorcism or not. If he continues to let the delight of his craft flow through, he will die for sure. Right? And there's all these reasons, and you can read it as an inner masculine sort of fulfilling his role, but on a whole other level, you could also read it at the level of, this is his bliss. He will not block the flowing of his bliss, even if it means he dies. And that is sort of the signal marker of having reached like this very high level of bliss. Just like music, right? The other demon reached this very high level of music, but he failed at the point where he refused to share and teach other people, right? And this Brahmin is not doing that. He's releasing his delight, his craft, his bliss of exorcism, even if it means certain death for him. He'll go forward. And just to give you the example, when I ask myself this question, right, as a healer in the world, right, my objective, not really objective, but it's like the thing that would be ultimate for me, right, would to somehow, either through the work I do or just in general, is for the world to be healed, right, of this inner wound that, is a pestilence on every single one of us. We call it many names, but the simplest name is this wound within us that makes us feel like no matter what we do, we are never good enough. We are never good enough. That constant feeling internally of fear, threat, and control that like estranges us from the realm of the sacred and the divine and our bliss and all of that stuff, and keeps us rooted in this world of fear, threat, and control. And so for me, it's like if someone could wave a magic wand, right, and say, voila, we're going to heal everyone of this wound and basically clear the lane for them to flow forward into their bliss. Right? I mean, the ultimate for me is a world which pretty much everyone is healed, and therefore then everyone is teed up to pursue their bliss. Right? And it's hard to even wrap your mind around the concept or the visualization of a world where everyone is actually pursuing their bliss, which means the only people painting are the people for whom painting is their bliss. Oh, and the only people doing investment banking or accounting or dentistry are the ones for whom investment banking, accounting, and dentistry are their bliss. Right? That's almost an unimaginable world. And then the question for me as a craftsman of what I do in healing, the question is like, would I die for that vision? Right? If you could guarantee me that would happen the minute I like fall dead and my heart stops beating, would I take that deal? And the answer is absolutely. I'd be like running for that deal. Right? That would be a bargain. I'd do that deal in a nanosecond. Right? That would be. I mean, I get kind of like excited just thinking about it. It's like, where's the? I'll like, take the pill, whatever. I'm ready. Right? I mean, I do the due diligence to make sure you weren't, the counterpart was acting in good faith. But yeah, absolutely. Right. The other way to ask the same question is the way Joseph Campbell used to ask it. Right. What would sustain you if everything else in your life was devastated? You came home and your family was gone, murdered. Right. Money gone, career in the toilet, reputation gone. You just a slander smear campaign. Right. Everything you had been working for was decimated, and you were left there with nothing. What would you do then? Would you just kill yourself or let yourself sort of die, or still live some kind of like, harsh life just for pleasure or just for like whatever addiction or whatever? Or would you carry on even with the loss of these other things because there was some other thing in your life that presumably is bigger than you, that would sustain you and keep you living even through the pain? And the question is, what would this thing be? The thing that would keep you living, and for those of you who have been following the past couple months, you'll know that I choose my words carefully when I say this. The thing that would keep you living for no good reason. For no good reason. Right? The thing that is bigger than you. Joe Campbell used to say, when he would give talks, I think in like the early 70s, he wouldn't say it like this later because it was too much for people. They would be too shocked and even offended. But Joe Campbell used to, and those of you who have done the Bliss program, you already know this story that I tell. But he used to reference Abraham Maslow and he would say, I love his work. He did this thing where he made this observation of the reasons people carried on their lives, right? That would come into Maslow's like psychotherapeutic practice. And he made all these observations, and he made this pyramid of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the reasons people live. Now, again, to be fair to Maslow, Joe Campbell was like, I'm a big respecter, admirer of Maslow's work. And these were not the things that Maslow was saying people should live for. These were the things that Maslow was saying in his original versions of the work, that he observed and heard from them that they did live for. So it wasn't a should, it was just like, this is what I'm observing and finding. And the 5 levels were, and there are different versions of these, but they're basically survival, security, relationships, love, right? Relationships, prestige, power, right? And self-development. So survival, security, relationships, prestige, power, and self-development. And Joe Campbell would say, I looked at that list and I was just like, geez. Well, the person who lives for just these things is the person who doesn't have anything to live for. because no higher mythic form, no higher archetype has gripped them. Right? Survival, security, relationships, prestige, even self-development. It's all fear, threat, and control. And that's my own addition. It's all fear, threat, and control. Right? And the other thing I would add is that, when you say no higher mythic form has gripped you, what you're basically saying is that someone who lives for just those 5 things is nothing but a glorified animal, right? And even not even, right? I could argue even an ant or honeybee who dies happily for the colony has a higher sense of self than a person who only lives for these 5 things. All linear, all Cartesian, all profane, fear, threat, and control, no mythopoetics, right? And no sacred. And so, so anyway, those of you who have done the Bliss program, you know that that's my big thing that I bring up again and again. But here then, you see the same thing. This Brahmin part of you, right? Not the music lover version, but the next, like 2.0 version that you circumambulate through, that has touched upon this exorcism as like the form of delight and bliss. He moves forward in the face of death anyway, because he's inner masculine, he's protecting his family. Yeah. But also there's this deeper level of like, he's not going to block his delight for anything, even in the face of death. It's not courage. It's like at that level of bliss, you kind of don't have a choice, right? If someone said you could live out the next 80 years of your life doing your bliss, or if you give your life right now, I'll make everything that you're working toward happen instantly, right? In the flash of an eye. It's like, I don't have a choice. Obviously, I have to give my life for that because I'm saving, well, I mean, first of all, I'm saving myself 80 years of work. But, a little bit more poetically, we could say that I'm saving the world 80 years of continued suffering, right? Not in their bliss and under the sort of burden of this wound and everything it's created, all the politicians, all the sort of strife, the raping of the environment and the sort of release of diseases and viruses, right? Blah, blah, blah. Once you're at that level, there's not even a choice. I mean, obviously you give your life. It's like people have given their lives for so much less. I could not for shame refuse something like that. It would be amazing. It would be delightful to take an offer like that. So this Brahmin, in exactly the same way, he goes in thinking he's going to die. And he's like, yeah, that's fine. I'm cool with that. But because he goes in, he goes in this with this feeling of delight, right? And he goes in, and to me, the way I read that final scene of the story, when he says, hey demon, do you want to leave the princess, or do you want me to bring back that god awful piper? It's like, hearing like, cats being like murdered or something. It's like squealing sort of the horrible pipes, right? So he goes in kind of with this tongue-in-cheek kind of attitude. To me, it's not a moment of cunning and dealing in bad faith, tricking the demon. It's not like the Devil's Bridge story that we did a couple months ago. He doesn't know it will work. He's not trying to cheat the demon, right? The choice simply is between the continuing flow of delight and helping others and risk dying, or you block it and you live on borrowed time. I mean, what's the point of living on if you can't fully be an exorcist for a king that comes begging your assistance for the princess, right? So the demon demonstrated the first path, gripping in the last moment and not sharing the gift of music. It turned out to be a transformation, not a punishment, and the transformation circumambulated into this second Brahmin. And so for this second Brahmin, on the verge of revealing himself to the demon, okay, when I put myself in that Brahmin's position, I'd be like, actually, I'm going to go and, I'm going to die, but I accept that. But before I die, I'm actually going to see my old buddy. Why is he my old buddy? He's the demon in the tree that brought me into first contact with my bliss and delight in the first place. If there is one person I would like to see before I die, and that was it, that's not a bad deal at all. Right? And it's like I accepted the deal. I could easily avoid the deal. I'm going in and taking the deal anyway. Of course I'm going to die. Of course I'm going to die. So he goes to his death in a state of full good faith, ready to go. Right? And at this high level of bliss, very few people will understand you. Right? They'll be like, "Oh, he was cunning. He was just a hero, right? He cheated the devil in the last minute and we got the bridge anyway. Ha ha, hooray." Right? For him in that seat, it's a very different calculus going on within him. With this feeling of delight, not planning anything tricky, what would you say to your old buddy, right? You'd be like, "Hey man, here I am. Okay, I guess you got to kill me now. What do you say?" Right? You would poke fun at him like you would do at your brother or your stupid cousin, right? Whom you love to pieces, right? Because you know his weak spot. You poke him with a sense of playfulness, right? "I'm fond of you." It's not that I fear you. It's like, "I'm fond of you." And it's interesting that the demon doesn't even recognize him the first time. He doesn't recognize, so he kind of takes the joke seriously. And so this for me is the par excellence, brilliant, pinnacle act of exorcism, where you don't break the deal, but you transcend it. Not through cunning, but through the continuing flow of delight, even in the face of death. Because then, in the end, he's going in jovially, ready to die, and he's going to see his old friend before he dies, the one that even brought me into delight. And why am I glad to see you? Why am I happy that you gave me this delight? Obviously, I love my delight so much, I'm willing to die for it. That's a good life, right? And that's why in the end, even in the end, acting in good faith, he cracks a joke, right? He cracks a joke in the end. It's like, "Oh, hey, princess, that demon within you, hey, demon, yeah, he's going to shoot me, dear. Don't worry. He's going to shoot me in the head. I'm going to die. But he's my friend, so I'm going to have one last laugh. Hey, man. So, all right, I'm the exorcist. Yeah, it's me. Can you believe it? Here I am. And so what do you want to do? Do you want to leave the princess or what? I don't even know. Yeah, should I bring that piper in that you hate so much?" Right? He's like poking him because it's like, it's hilarious. And so to me, the highest practitioners of any craft have a great sense of humor and lightness. And I think precisely because of this, because they are so deeply in a state of delight. Yeah, there's money and prestige and everyone's like falling all over themselves, like, "Oh, the great master is here." But when they come in, they're like giggling, they're laughing, they're like poking fun at people. Not because it's not a show. It's because they are in such a good mood. They are in this very light feeling of delight because their delight is in full flow within them. And then, by the way, that's what makes them a master, but nobody cares. They don't care. They don't care. And then, when the demon was like, "Oh, no, I can't," he might have been like, no, come back. You can still kill me. I'm fine with dying. I was just joking. Right? I'm not trying to cheat you. It's like a deal is a deal. Right? And you can imagine him saying that, and you can imagine the demon being like, "Oh, it's you. Yeah, I guess I have to kill you." Well, no, it's fine. Right? Or you could say the demon could say something like, "All right, I might have to kill you. But yeah, good one with the piper thing." You got me. All right, how about this? Let's do this. Right? And they come up with another deal. Not out of malice, not out of fear, threat, or control, but out of this human-heartedness. Right? Because when you think about it at the big picture, these are two parts of you, right? The princess is a part of you. The kings are a part of you. And when you deal with yourself in this very, there's a Chinese word that doesn't quite, those of you who speak Chinese, it's run, right? It's run. The run zipang and the run, it's commonly translated as compassion, but I prefer the translation of human-heartedness, right? Kind of this feeling of like, we're all like rascals here anyway. I'm gonna like dodge, you're gonna parry, we're gonna, but we're rivals. We're at the poker table. We're like competitors, but we're not enemies, right? If you were my enemy, I would just shoot you. I wouldn't play poker with you, right? And all these parts of us that are within us, they may disagree on how to move forward in your life. They may, maybe like I'll throw an elbow in your face when the ref's not looking. But really, at the end of the day, it's all in good fun. Right? We're not actually enemies. Your liver and heart are not actually enemies. They may compete for resources, for blood, for oxygen, but they're not actually enemies. Either of them loses the other, everyone is screwed. Okay. So this to me is not an allegory of like you want to be like the Brahman, you don't want to be like the music-loving demon. It's not an allegory. It's a symbol. You have both instincts. You have the instinct to grip and threaten and withhold your bliss and your delight out of fear. What will people think? I can make more money doing this other thing. My father won't give me a hard time if I do this other thing. But the thing is, even if you take the demon path, the demon turned out okay. Right? By the end of the story, the demon turned out okay. He just went on a longer circumambulation. Did some time in the tree, no big deal. He's a demon. He lives forever. It's fine. Right? But the other path, the path of the Brahmin, who goes all the way through his delight, that is okay too. Right? And when you see the overall options, right, you choose whatever you choose. But at any given time, if you're like, well, if I don't have a lot of overwhelming fear, threat, and control, of course I'm going to choose the Brahmin path because I have more delight in the Brahmin path. Right? I mean, if you think only in terms of bliss and delight, it's like, well, I choose the Brahmin path because he had delight all the way to the end. The demon actually stopped his delight at a certain point. That's why he ended up in the tree. Right? So the Brahmin path is the path you would choose if you choose to flow with your delight, come what may. Come what may. Right? Unconditionally. Right? You love and you're committed to your delight without condition, without fear, without threat, without control. And if you do that, it will be okay. If you don't do that and you grip with fear, threat, and control, that'll be okay too. Right? But when you see the big picture, it's kind of irresistible, right? And I'm not trying to get you to choose one. I mean, you can choose either path. You'll be just fine. But when you see the big picture, it's like, I mean, if you're following delight, it's like it kind of makes sense. So, long story short, if you follow delight leading into your bliss, you don't care if things are okay or not. You just care about delight. There's an analog to this in the Christian tradition in the New Testament. When Christ says, he who saves his life will lose it. He who gives up his life will save it. And that's exactly what that means in this mythopoetic manner. Find your bliss, let go, follow through, and everything will be okay. If you clamp down on it, eventually it will be okay too. It will just lead to another kind of transformation. And for me, doing talks like this is a form of delight for me, right? Which is one of the reasons why I'm still doing them, even now, like going on a year now. I just love it, right? For me, it's like if I roll my eyes and say, "Oh, the world is going to pot," and everyone thinks in Cartesian terms and linear and literal, and everything's fear, threat, and control. Everything is capitalism, and no one's looking at the world through mythopoetics. Woe is me, I'm just a voice in the wilderness. Well, the natural question is, why don't I share my art? Why don't I share my craft, right? Now, complaining is okay, but it's not the only door available to you. There are other options. Okay, so let's see. We got about 10 minutes left. Gary, do you have any other thoughts that you might like to share?
Hi, Artie.
Hi.
Hi, thank you for that. That was really powerful coming from a story that felt so lighthearted, like I said. But it also reminded me of, I mentioned this, the story that we did called The Devil's Bridge, where there's a very similar motif of the old lady outwitting the devil, right? In order to kind of cheat death or transformation. And then that's something that happens here at the end. So the Brahmin actually outwits the demon to cheat death. I mean, he doesn't go in. The key difference, I think, is that he doesn't go in planning and scheming to cheat death.
Right.
So the additional, I think, insight that just came in with this story is there is on one hand, you actively try to cheat death and transformation because you just don't feel ready for it, and that's fine. That's okay. But there's the other aspect of it where you don't even try to cheat death because you don't care. And that motivation comes from the fact that you follow delight right to the end, that you just don't know where it's leading you. And you just let it flow and see what happens. So very, very similar stories, but the kind of powerful insights that they both give, again, like crossroads, is like path A and path B, and this is what happens. I just felt like, wow, that's just amazing. Two similar stories, and I hadn't noticed the similarity until you pointed that out. So that was really powerful for me. So that is one, and the other similarity that I felt reading the story is that the 5 years that the Brahmin spends, where the demon tells him, well, that's your fate, you can't bypass that, is that he goes to Varanasi and he stays on the riverbank, and he goes through a whole purification period, right? Washing himself and in the Ganga and all of that. That, even though the motif of washing is kind of in contrast, we have that in the Never Wash story, where the soldier kind of spends 15 years not washing himself. In that phase, and then the insight comes out of it. And here it's like a 5-year period, but here it's an amazing kind of aspect of it where it says that we have a deal, we'll give each other these rewards and gifts, but then there is a path that you cannot bypass. You'll have to go through that, and you'll have to go through that purification, which I think was an amazing detail.
That's really interesting. I thought about, you brought me in our brainstorm back to those 5 years in the River Ganga.
Yeah.
And one thing that came to me was that because I was like, why is it 5 years, right? Because it's usually like, 7 years or 3 years or 15 years.
Yeah.
And the thing that connected it for me was this idea of purgation, right? Purging, purification. Because in the talk on the 7 chakras from like months ago, the throat chakra is the chakra of purgation, right? So in the Christian tradition, purgatory, right, limbo, is the place where you purge yourself in order to be able to go up to heaven, right? So this purging phase. And in a very similar way, the throat chakra is known as the phase of spiritual development or whatever, of purging before you go up to the 6th chakra, the chakra of Agya, which in that talk, the 7 chakras talk, was the chakra associated with bliss and your delight. And of course, the throat chakra, Vishuddha, is the 5th chakra. It's chakra 5. So you spend 5 years at chakra 5 purging. And one of the things that happens is, as we said in the talk on 7 chakras, is that you recover the power of your voice to speak truthfully, not just in an allegorical sense to the rest of the world, not telling lies and all that, but also internally, mythopoetically, symbolically within you, where you also speak truth to your own inner self. Questions are, as the Brahmin demonstrated, what are you, threatening demon voice within me? what do you need, right? What is the matter here? You make a deal and you speak your truth about what is actually my delight, right? And speaking your truth to yourself as to what is your delight is the thing that is the penultimate step to bliss. Because when you do your bliss, right, people realize, oh my gosh, this is I could see the seeds of my bliss in childhood. Yes, you could, of course, see the seeds of your bliss in childhood. Just like you could see your eye color when you were a child. I mean, but the recognition of that, right? The recognition of that my bliss is actually this, and I will protect it, and I will protect it potentially to the point where even I lose my life, right? In that Christian sense, I give everything to it. That is that next level of not just recognizing your bliss, but speaking your truth about your bliss. To say this thing, this is me, this is my bliss, and this is the thing that is the whole point of my life. So that is a truth telling within your own self. That is a very, I mean, it's not a chakra 2 thing, it's a chakra 5 thing, right? At a minimum.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Okay, so we're pretty much at time.
Yeah.
Should we just do the, maybe we'll save the sort of meditation for next session?
Yeah.
And do we want to talk about just the sort of prompt exercise for the story?
Yeah, so the reflections for this would be great. I think we've done delight as, this is the sequel of the last session.
Right.
But I think
So
if I
actually,
remember,
do you want to recap what last week's exercise was, and then we'll kind of go into this week's exercise?
Yeah. So the last week, the reflection, the questions for reflection were that, where do you find delight in a place within yourself, and what is it about you, the thing that you love to do, the thing that gives you delight for no reason, and also how do you find that manifest for you through the body, and how do you embody this delight, and how do you feel in your body when you let this delight flow. So that was last week. So basically it was an exercise to find delight within you, to kind of locate it with coordinates within you. Where does it occur, right? And here we are again talking about the flow of delight, but what would you recommend that we?
So, so the way I would think about this is, and for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, when we suggest an exercise, we still follow the 4th principle of Presidium Sacred Space, which is no expectation of participation. So it's just a suggestion. Do it only if you want. There will be no quiz. It's not graded. So you don't have to do it if you don't want.
Yeah.
But at some point, if you want, between now and next Sunday's session or whenever, find some quiet time for yourself, 5 or 10 minutes. Get some pen and paper and ask yourself the questions that we'll give. And you can do this at home, but if your home's a zoo because there's tons of people falling from the rafters, you can do it in your car, right? So let's say you drive to the grocery store to get food. After you park, you can sit in your car for an extra 5 or 10 minutes. No one's going to miss you. Pull out a piece of paper and write down your reflections for the questions. Only if you want. And so this week's follow-on to last week is the way I would like to do this is to say, so with your delight then, that perhaps you started to triangulate on and identify from last week's exercise, what then are the things in the world and in your life that spark and ignite and provoke your delight, that invoke your delight, right? So you may say, oh, my delight is, music. Well, that's pretty general. So what are the things that provoke listening to this kind of music? And I'm like, playing music? No, not playing, listening to music, but only in a live sort of setting, not recording. It's like, so you sort of whittle it down to like exactly what is the thing physically in your body that gets your delight going, right? Is it dance? Is it reading? Is it spreadsheets? Is it writing computer code, right? What is your delight? And then what are the concrete, actual activities done through your body in the physical world that kind of get your delight going? Okay, so that's the first question. And then the second question is, are you letting these things happen in your life? Or are you clamping down and suppressing them and stuffing them down? Okay. That is the question. And if you are stuffing them down, why is that? And then we come back to the healing question of like, what is the matter here? What is the matter here? And just to be sure we're all sort of being honest here and dealing with delight in good faith, right? To let us be fair and honest. If you say, well, I would like to do that, but I just have no time. I have no time is a form of stuffing it down. I have no time is a form of stuffing it down. Not to drive the knife in too much and twist it too much, but when you say I have no time, it's a form of stuffing it down. You are the sovereign of your life. You control your time. The things in your life that take up your time are there because you let them. And maybe there's an inner masculine boundary issue. There's all kinds of healing reasons why that might be the case. But I have no time is a valid form of stuffing it down. Now that's okay, as we know from the story. If you stuff it down, it'll be all right eventually. But there are alternatives. Right? You do have a choice. You do have a choice. That's what I think the exercise would be.
Yeah.
That's
that'll be fun revelations coming up with.
Good. All right, so let's do we're over time already. Let's do the meditation thing I was planning on for next time.
All right.
Assuming people even like doing these exercises. And yeah, so that'll be the exercise. And okay, so I guess that's it for the session.
Okay.
And I'll go ahead and close. I'll go ahead and close. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Gary. Talk to you soon. All right, so that's the end of our session. Our next session is same time, same place, next Sunday. I'll just drop the link here in the comments. So you can sign up now if you like. It's free, open to the public. Invite your friends if you want. And I'll see you next Sunday. And with that, I'll go ahead and close the session. So I hereby close this session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me and with us. And thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment, and the spiritual nourishment that comes from this shared sacred space with us. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great day, have a great week, and I will see you all in the next session. Thank you. Thank you.